Welcome to Oli Ola, the Storyteller. True stories straight from people's lives, both in the present and in the past. Today's tale is Ashes of the Oak, the gripping journey of Elias, a man betrayed by his closest friend and exiled in disgrace. Cast out into the wild with nothing but his honor, Elias fights to survive while bitterness gnaws at his soul. But when the very town that condemned him falls into flames, Elias faces a choice: let them burn, or rise from the shadows and become the hero no one saw coming. It's a story of quiet strength, buried truth, and the kind of redemption that only comes through fire. If you believe in justice, loyalty, and the power of second chances, then you'll want to hear more. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment if this story moved you. Let me know what kind of real-life stories you'd love to hear next. Because here at Oli Ola, we don't just tell stories, we give them life. Ashes of the Oak. Chapter 1. The Silence Beyond Greystone. At the edge of the ancient forest, where moss hung like old secrets from the branches and the wind carried no name, Elias lived as a shadow among the trees. The remnants of an abandoned hunter's lodge served as his refuge, with gaps in the walls stuffed with animal hides and a roof patched in places with thatch and bark. The hearth, though shallow and half collapsed, still cradled embers each night, and Elias knew the exact rhythm of feeding it. 2 sticks at dawn, 1 thicker log at night. Any more would waste fuel, any less, and the cold would creep into his bones. Elias rose with the light and slept with the dark. His days passed in silent labor, snaring rabbits, chopping wood, mending boots worn thin by the unforgiving paths of exile. His body had grown lean, hardened not by war, but by want. His face, once open and expressive, now bore the unreadable stillness of a stone carved by time. Deep brown eyes held the burden of too many sleepless nights, and his beard had grown in wild, flecked with grey at the chin. He had once stood tall among the town guard of Greystone, a man respected for his integrity and wisdom. Now he was spoken of in whispers and half-remembered curses. The betrayal still hung over him like a storm that never passed. 3 winters ago, when the siege of Valmir loomed and every able man was pressed into service, Elias had served as quartermaster, a position of immense trust. The routes of supply caravans were secret and vital. When those routes were ambushed and 2 wagons burned with all inside, suspicion turned inward. It was Jonas, his closest friend, who stood at the centre of the council hall and held up the letter that condemned him. A parchment inked with Elias's handwriting, or something close enough. Elias remembered the silence in the chamber, the weight of every eye. He remembered the sickened twist in his gut, not from the accusation itself, but from the sight of Jonas unable to meet his gaze. He had not fought the judgment. What would have been the use? The voices of loyalty were drowned out by fear. Greystone had always feared the shadow more than it loved the light. They exiled him with a cold efficiency, and not a soul followed him to the forest's edge. Now, each morning, he stood by the old oak tree that marked the northern boundary of his solitude. Its trunk was massive and scorched from lightning years ago, yet still it lived. Elias had named it Witness. "They believed you too quickly," he said once to the bark. "They forgot everything we gave them." The wind stirred the leaves but offered no answer. Yet speaking was relief enough. He had nothing else to talk to. Chapter 2. A Whisper on the Wind. The seasons turned as they always did. Winter thawed reluctantly into a wet and muddy spring. The forest bloomed with violets, and the croaking of frogs returned to the pond below the ridge. Elias had grown familiar with the cycles. He could read the weather in the rustle of leaves and smell the coming rain in the dirt. One afternoon, while cleaning a fox pelt by the stream, Elias heard hoofbeats. Not the heavy gallop of a soldier's steed, but the lighter rhythm of a pony. He tensed, bow within reach. Visitors were rare and never accidental. A boy emerged from the trees, no older than 15, freckled, sunburned, his clothes too big for him. He led a shaggy pony carrying a sack of dried fish and salt. "Are you Elias?" the boy asked. Elias gave a short nod. The boy hesitated. "I bring trade, from the coast, fish for furs. My uncle said you'd deal fair." Word still spread, it seemed. Elias nodded again and led the boy to the lodge. They bartered quickly, fox pelt for fish, salt for a repaired bootlace. Before leaving, the boy lingered. "You used to be in Greystone, right?" he asked. Elias studied him. "I was." The boy lowered his voice. "They're saying things now, that Lord Jonas has money he shouldn't, that records from the siege are missing. My uncle says there's a ledger no one can find. You think it means something?" Elias's mouth tightened. A long silence passed. "It means someone's afraid the truth is crawling back," he said at last. The boy looked spooked. He climbed back onto his pony and left with a hasty farewell. Elias stood in the fading sun, a deep tremor in his chest. The past was not buried, it was simply delayed. That night he did not sleep. He remembered every detail of the trial, the rushed vote, the grim nods of the council, the parchment with his forged name. Jonas's face most of all, regretful but determined. A coward's expression. If the truth was leaking through the cracks, then Greystone was standing on hollow stone. Chapter 3. The Flames of Reckoning. It began with the sky. On the 12th night of autumn, Elias looked up to see the horizon glowing a strange orange, unnatural and fast rising. Smoke billowed, carried by the wind like black banners. Then came the echo, distant screams, frantic bells. Greystone was burning. Elias stood frozen. The town that had rejected him now called for aid, not in words but in chaos. His muscles moved before his mind agreed. He packed nothing. He grabbed a water skin and an axe and ran. The hills between his exile and Greystone had never felt steeper. Trees blurred past. His lungs burned with every breath, but the fire ahead burned hotter. As he reached the outskirts, the smell of scorched timber and panic met him. The North Quarter was ablaze. Homes collapsed into ash. Children cried, mothers shouted names into smoke. Elias moved into the chaos without thought. He grabbed a woman paralyzed with terror and dragged her from her burning doorway. He found 2 young boys clutching a dog in the alley and herded them to the well. No one recognized him at first, but soon someone did. "That's Elias," a man shouted, "the exile." A dozen turned. Whispers erupted, yet no one stopped him. They watched him leap onto the smithy's roof with a water bucket. They saw him break a window to pull an old man to safety. The fire revealed truths the courtroom had buried. And then he saw him, Jonas, coughing, limping, dragging a locked chest through the mud. Smoke curled around him like judgment. A support beam cracked above, then fell. Jonas screamed, his leg pinned. Elias could have walked away. It would have been justice. Instead, he sprinted. He lifted the burning beam, flames licking his sleeves. He pulled Jonas free and carried him over his shoulder to safety. By the time they reached the well, Elias's hands were blistered. He dropped Jonas unceremoniously and returned to the fire. Not a single soul stopped him. Chapter 4. The Truth in Ashes. The fire's aftermath left the town blackened and raw. As the sun rose over smouldering rooftops, its golden rays painted the ash-covered square in light that looked almost holy, though few would call that morning blessed. Exhausted townsfolk had gathered, many with bandaged hands or sooty faces streaked with tears. Some sat silently on the stone steps of the temple, staring at what little remained of their homes. Others huddled near wells and wagons, clutching blankets and each other. Elias leaned against the well, not far from where he had left Jonas. His hands were cracked and blistered, but he had cleaned them in silence. No one dared speak to him yet. A hush swept over the square as the council arrived. Robes singed, pride shaken. They moved as a single body, visibly humbled by the devastation and by the man who now stood among them. Whispers passed through the crowd like ripples across water. "Will they punish him again?" someone murmured. "Should they praise him?" said another. Before either question could settle, Jonas raised a trembling hand from his stretcher. "I have a confession," he said, voice dry and rasping. Silence fell hard and fast. "I lied," he said again, louder. 3 years ago, I forged Elias's signature. I sold the caravan routes to enemy scouts for coin. I thought, foolishly, that the enemy would leave us be, that I could pay off debts and end the siege without blood. But I was wrong. So many died. Elias, he was innocent. Gasps erupted. A child began to sob. "Why now?" asked one of the elders, voice trembling. Jonas turned to look at Elias. "Because last night he saved my life, when he had every right to let me burn." A moment passed, then another. Then the High Counselor, a woman who had voted for Elias's exile, stepped forward. "You let a good man suffer for your sins," she said, "and we let fear blind us to the truth." She turned to Elias, her voice faltering. "Will you forgive us?" Elias said nothing. His expression did not soften, but neither did it harden. He simply stared at Jonas, and then the crowd, letting the silence stretch. When he spoke, it was calm. "I forgive no one who hasn't changed," he said, "but I came back to save lives. That's all I ever wanted to do." Some wept. Others bowed their heads. The council offered restitution, but Elias asked for none. His fire had burned long before the towns had. All he wanted now was peace. Chapter 5. The oak still stands. Elias was given the freedom of the town and the thanks of its people, but he accepted no seat of honor. Instead, he requested a small home near the fields outside the walls, where wind passed freely and the soil was soft for planting. He built a cottage with his own hands. Greystone offered labor, but Elias politely declined. He needed to feel the timber against his palms, to place each stone with intention. In time, he planted an orchard, apple, plum, and oak. Children would visit him, bringing questions about traps, stars, or stories from the siege. He answered with patience, but rarely at length. He had become something more than a man to them, a symbol. Yet he never acted the part. He laughed little, but when he did, it warmed the soul. His eyes remained steady and clear. Word of his deeds spread beyond Greystone. Travellers stopped to pay their respects. Soldiers from distant towns asked his counsel. Even nobles wrote letters inviting him to dine and speak. Elias declined them all. He did not seek to become a legend. He had already lived through the fire that melted masks and stripped lies to their core. He knew what silence cost. He knew the weight of being forgotten. Jonas was exiled under guard. As he passed through the gates, this time truly disgraced, Elias stood on the ridge, watching. Their eyes met briefly. Elias gave no sign, but that night, under starlight, he lit a small candle in the orchard. "For mercy," he said aloud, "for all those who never received it." The wind stirred the trees. A leaf fell. In the center of the orchard, one tree grew taller than the others, a young oak, strong and unshaken. Beside it, Elias placed a stone with no name, not as a monument, but as a reminder that even from the ashes of betrayal, something good could take root. that even a heart burned with grief could learn to forgive, and that the oak still stands, so did he.